Hey folks, it's Leah. Thank you for joining me today. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about dieting, and if that's really upsetting for you, maybe this is not the video for you. But I do get a lot of questions and unsolicited advice and so on around the idea of dieting. Probably the most obnoxious thing that thin people do is take on this really patronizing tone and be like, have you ever thought of going on a diet? As though they're the only person that has ever crossed our paths that is smart enough to recommend a diet, which is clearly the answer. It's frustrating and honestly kind of embarrassing. Not for me. Like when I see people do it, I'm like, oh man, I wish you knew how foolish you look right now. Or maybe, you know what? Maybe ignorance is bliss. When people are sort of asking about or recommending diets and things like that, I think they're coming from a place of, this fat girl just really needs me to tell her to be on a diet and then that'll fix everything. It's sort of the impression I get from these comments. So I just want to sort of set the record straight on my relationship with diets. And this is actually going to get more personal than I normally like to get, but I think it's important to understand this channel is built on sort of storytelling, and I think it's useful for me to give a real life case study in what that trajectory looks like for a lot of fat people. So there's an understanding, hopefully, of why that is not helpful advice. So I have pretty much always been fat, if not from birth, then from a very young age. Looking back at my school pictures, there are none where I'm a skinny kid. I've just never been thin. The really big up in my sort of my body size, I started to notice it when I was around 5, and I find that really interesting because that's also around the time that a lot of sort of bad stuff was happening in my life. Probably there's an element of stress and cortisol and stuff. There was a lot of, it's nobody's business what was happening, but it was a very stressful time for me. There was a lot of really bad feelings I was having. I was dealing with a lot as a kid, between the age of 5.5 to 6.5, maybe. I call that the bad year. It's just sort of, when I look back at my childhood, I'm like, that year was that a lot was happening in that year, It was sort of you do see a significant jump when you look at my school picture from when I was almost 5 to when I was almost 6. There's actually a significant jump in the size of my body, and then moving on from there, it just sort of increased. I had always been bullied by the kids because even when I was a 4 or 5-year-old in kindergarten, I was fatter than the other kids. I've always been fat. I became considerably fatter as I got older, but by the time I was in middle school, I think probably I had sized out of kids' clothes by the time I was about 12. There just was nothing that would fit me, and so I had started wearing plus size clothing before I started high school. I'm pretty sure that's sort of a trajectory of the size of my body. When I was a kid, a small kid, I was bullied pretty badly. There was a real spike when my body started becoming fatter when I was around 6 or so. So I remember at one point I had come home and I had said to my mother, the kids are really bullying me. They keep calling me fat. They keep being mean to me. And I remember crying to my mother. I was 8 years old at the time. She had said to me, okay, well, let's put you on a diet. The adult in me is actually really mad because I know she was doing her best, and we live in basically a soup of fat phobia. Everybody's you got to be thin. If someone's mean to you, if someone does something bad to you, it's your fault because you're fat. It's sort of just what the world seems to believe and what we're told all the time. And so to a point, I don't blame my mother, but the adult in me is that was not the right answer. If someone was I'm at school and people are bullying me for being gay, you wouldn't be well, let's send you to conversion therapy. I mean, I hope to goodness that wouldn't be the answer, because that is really, really bananas. So I think there's just sort of this attitude that if there's something bad happening because you're fat, you should just not be fat. And now I recognize that as a big problem, and it's not an excuse to be bad to people. Why are you being bad to people? Maybe deal with your stuff and then you don't have to be bad to people. Anyway, my mom put me on a diet. She had gone with me to the doctor and she had said, what do I do? And the doctor, basically the answer was, food, take all of the joy out of it. So if you give her an egg, take out the yolk. If you give her toast, don't put butter or margarine or anything on it. Like, just give her dry, it was just miserable. And for an 8-year-old, like, if you think about as an adult trying to eat the blandest food ever, you're like, oh, this is miserable already. But then if you give it to an 8-year-old, like, she's not going to love it. There was definitely some like tears at the breakfast table and stuff. And I just remember like really, really hating it and feeling like it just wasn't fair. And, eventually my mother got fed up and was like, fine, we're not doing this anymore. That was sort of my first exposure to a diet. So I was put on my first diet when I was 8 years old. I did continue to become fatter. The fatness that I was when I went on my first diet is much smaller than I ever would be ever in the rest of my life. So I became fatter after this diet. When I got into my tweens, I started sort of doing some like restricting stuff for myself. And then as an adult, I continued that and did like some forms of exercise that were discreet, because I had learned from school that, because I actually really liked sports, but I had learned from school that I was not welcome in sports. And so I stopped playing sports, like group sports. So when I was 8, younger than 8 actually, when I was about 7, I think, I would swim every day in the summer. So there was a pool near my house and I would just go down there. And from the time they opened, I was actually there before open, I would watch them fill the pool. And when they opened the pool, they'd be like, okay, Lee, you can get in. And I would jump in and I would swim all day. Literally, I would just come out of the pool because they would put the chlorine and you would have to wait a little. And that was the only time I came out of the pool. And then at the end of the day, they would be like, okay, it's time to get out of the pool. We got to close the pool. So I would come out of the pool and I would watch them drain the pool. And then I would do that every single day in the summer, because at the time the public pool was open every day. Swimming was something that even as like a 7-8-year-old, I was like really, really fond of. And so that continued probably until my tweens. Till I was probably like 12 or 13. And at that time, I started getting really like negative attention on my body. And so I stopped going to the pool. When I was in, I think like grade 1 or 2, so I was probably like 6, 7, I was part of like a t-ball team. I was interested in continuing in those sports and stuff. But the problem is that there were like bullies in the place where we would go to do the sports. And so if like Tuesday was my brother's day and Thursday was my day, the whole family would go both days. And on Tuesdays, like all the bullies would be bullying me in the yard while my brother was like playing softball or whatever. It just became like a really negative experience. So I didn't really want to go back. At one point I think I was 12 when I was in middle school, I got into handball and I really liked handball. I don't know if you are familiar, but it's kind of like you're running around and you're passing the ball to each other and trying to get it into the net and so on. So I found it a really fun game. But the problem is that was one of the first times, like just sort of explicitly, it was made very, very clear that I was not welcome on the team. And it wasn't a competitive team or anything. It was just like sort of the school team. We were 12-year-olds, right? We weren't like in championships or anything. But I remember like, even though I really enjoyed it, if I wasn't like the best on the team, I was like, it was blamed on my body, and I was like shamed by the other girls on the team because they were like, well, if you weren't so fat, you'd be better and we'd win more and blah, blah, blah. It was just like a really hostile environment to try to be a fat kid who was trying to play in sports. And so I learned at a really early age that was not really an option for me. So instead I started focusing more on, like, my mom and I would go for walks. I would swim in like more private areas. Like if I was going to be able to go to like a community center that had like a period where it was like, pay a couple of dollars and come in, like swim for an hour or whatever, I could do that with my mom. I just did a lot of like independent sort of like walking around, riding my bicycle. I did have a bike. I really enjoyed my bike growing up, stuff like that. And it became like, exercise became like a solitary thing for me. And I'm actually a really social person. It wasn't that fun. I think that is really unfortunate because, we're always saying like, fat people have to like diet and exercise. And it's like, okay, well then let us exercise in peace. Support us when we're trying to exercise, and don't do that like patronizing, like, good girl, you can do it. I believe in you. You're doing great. Like, that's really patronizing. Don't do that. But like, also don't make our lives difficult because we're trying to be in those spaces. Anyway, that's sort of like my story around like diet and exercise early in my life. The pattern I noticed was that every time I went on a diet, even if I lost a few pounds, I would gain all of it back and then some. So I just kind of got fatter the more I dieted. That's something that as an older person, like now as a grown woman, I'm just not interested. I'm just not interested. The best research we have says it's really difficult for people to lose a significant amount of weight and also keep it off for the long term. So it, to me, just sort of sounds like, beating your head on the wall and wondering why your life isn't getting better, And so I've just made a decision to not, and to focus instead on choices that are really clearly within my control. So like eating foods that make me feel good and nourish me, moving how I can in ways that I find joyful. I love gardening, so I garden. I do when I can, and it's not, going to be a public spectacle and people are going to body shame me. I do sometimes swim still. That is really a big piece though, is that it's difficult for fat people to swim in public places because people shame them all the time. And as I'm getting older, I am sort of focusing on, because I'm a bit of an indoor cat in the winter, like I'm just kind of like, snow, no thank you. No thank you. I am not interested. So I will like focus on like puttering, just sort of like, tidying things up, doing some, like I do a lot of like cooking and baking. And so I think like there's been more of a focus on that as I've gotten older. And like, as in particular, as I've had sort of a fluctuation in my mobility and stuff. So like when I had my broken ankle, obviously I had to do a lot of more like organizing tasks to like contribute to the household. Just moving is like difficult because we are shamed out of so many places. And so that's something that is it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're like, oh, these fat people, they don't move around. It's like, well, maybe if you didn't harass us when we tried to move around, we would move around, That kind of sums up my relationship with this whole like diet and exercise advice. It's not useful, and honestly, no one believes it when I say it, but like the research genuinely shows that it is not effective. Yet people are just like, well, no, it's just because you're doing it wrong. It's not. It simply isn't. So I like to focus instead on things that I can control. I actually made a whole video of things that I do that are really healthy, and they're lifestyle choices that are really within my control. But I think it's like important to sort of remove that shame piece, because when we shame people and we say like, you should lose weight, it's like, that doesn't make you more able to lose weight. Like losing weight is incredibly difficult, if not impossible for people over the long term, but it still makes you feel crappy. So it like makes you feel like you have to, but it doesn't make you any more able to actually do it. So it just puts all this shame on you. I'm tired of that, and I reject that. I'm just not interested at this point in my life. Next time that you're, on YouTube watching a video of a fat person being like, I am happy with my body and I am making the best choices I can for myself, try not to be like, oh, this person must be so stupid, they don't understand that diet and exercise is the answer. I assure you, they know more about it than you do. You are actually the one who is uneducated. So have fun in my comments, I guess. Anyway, so I hope this video was illuminating and gave a little bit of insight into sort of how fat people, the relationship they have with diets and so on, and the relationship that they have with exercise, and this sort of idea of trying to lose weight through diet and exercise. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you learned something, you found it educational, you found it funny or whatever. If you want to get a notification when I upload, because I do upload every Wednesday, just hit the subscribe button and hit the little bell notification symbol, and it'll let you know when I upload. Thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now.